Hello, and welcome to the webinar, Database Threats, Preventing the Unthinkable with Zero Trust Data Security. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, then I'll turn things over to our speaker. First, we'd like to thank Rubrik for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful partner to Argyle, and they're committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. Thank you again to Rubrik. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum, and also be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Following the discussion, we've set aside time for our speaker to weigh in on your questions. Now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Today we have Chris Wolf, Database Solution Architect at Rubrik. We are pleased to have Chris here with us today for the webinar, Database Threats, Preventing the Unthinkable with Zero Trust Data Security. Welcome, Chris. Over to you.
Thanks for having me today. Today we're going to talk about database threats. We're going to talk about preventing the worst with zero trust data management. My name is Christopher Wolf. I'm a database solutions architect here at Rubrik. And the agenda we're going to talk about today is, what the problem is, what the solutions we could come up with, and how do we address those issues. So what is the problem? The past few years have showed everyone how critical data is to business activities, how susceptible it is to attack. Security research has said for years the two types of organizations exist are ones that have been hacked, and those that don't know they've been hacked. Defense in depth doesn't stop everything, and technical solutions only go so far. They are dependent on human interaction with data input, analysis, and maintenance. And the fact that humans make mistakes, unless of course you're a DBA, in which you're perfect as well. But how do we fix these fundamental issues? So is there a solution? Attacks have one common theme. They want to impact your data in some fashion. Exfiltration, ransomware, denying access, etc. If we want to minimize risk, we need to move beyond basics, defense in depth, and move to security at the point of the data itself. Some of the best ways to address this are implementing a zero trust framework throughout your data lifecycle, and then implementing mitigation plans to minimize your impact. So let's talk more about this with a primary focus in areas of mitigation. Proactive mitigation, insurance or CYA mitigation, and then reactive mitigation as well. So let's start with proactive mitigation. So proactive mitigation focuses on efforts on tasks that can be done to prevent an attack from being successful. This is not a single activity when it comes to database threats. It spans multiple areas. These include infrastructure, authentication, authorization, data lifecycle, and application design and usage. So what should companies be focusing on to maximize their data security? So first is infrastructure. Hardware vendors update their BIOS and firmware, and they are often forgotten about. These updates contain security updates that patch low-level exploits. Operating system vendors are constantly reviewing threats against them. They will run red team versus blue team exercises to find holes and patch them. This is in addition to the bug bounty programs they have available to them. With all of this information, they will apply these fixes to their OSs and release monthly or more frequently security updates are critical to keeping an OS, hardened against these threats, basically. Hypervisors are an additional point of entry. These are systems that are their own operating system and applications, but they contain their full set of exploits along with that. Think about the recent, exploit that affected vCenter. Thankfully, VMware, worked very fast to get that up, to get a workaround and patch it out to customers so the exploit could be closed. But, it's something to be aware of, basically. And database platforms like SQL Server release security updates in addition to the regular normal update lifecycle to ensure, a secure platform. These security updates are closing exploits found that are specific to the database platform. They would be additional exploits to what you found on the OS itself, basically. There's a great deal of patching. How should a limited set of resources prioritize their patching efforts? DBAs can't do this alone. It's really a team effort with your security team and overall sysadmins to decide what patches are critical and what are nice to haves. Knowing what to patch, when to patch is great, but when you have done what have you done to ensure the correct person is performing the activities? That brings us to our next subject, authentication. So with authentication, the main thing we're going to talk about, a lot of people talk about, is MFA. So when it comes to MFA, the main thing is like something, a password or a PIN that is given to you, something you have, either a smartphone or a USB key, you're using Google Authenticator or MS Authenticator, and those programs help you to make sure that you have rotating keys, things like that. And then something you are, a fingerprint or facial recognition. On my phone on my computer currently, I have a webcam on it, and it recognizes my face to get into any applications I need to get into in our system. Password storage, don't store your passwords in plain text. Obviously, that's pretty obvious to most people nowadays, but just in case. And then hash passwords stored in databases, you have many different programs that can do that for you. And then password policy. Length is better than complexity due to password patterns created by users. Password crackers, have adapted to those. Can easily crack a password that is like password 123, but making the password longer is harder for the password crackers to crack. Using breached password protection, each new password is compared to a blacklist of already compromised passwords. If the new password is on that list, it should be rejected altogether. And then periodic resets, cause users to use predictable patterns when creating new passwords, things like that. So tokens and certificates are another thing to consider as well. Do not hard code your tokens into the applications. They should be stored separately. Treat tokens as you would passwords. And then tokens should be like certificates. They should expire after a certain amount of time. They can be rotated on periodic basis, things like that. Assuming we follow the standard reference, once we authenticate, we should be able to do whatever we want, correct? Well, not quite. And the things that bring us to our next subject, which is called privileges. So, excessive privileges is the first thing. Is the minimal permission required to do a job principle being followed? If we've got, a sysadmin on a different location, but he's not a DBA, Does he really need full access to that database? Things like that. How many people have elevated access to the database? Along with that, do we have admins? Maybe you had a principal architect who was standing up the database at first, and then he wanted to you gave him full access at the beginning, but as the production becomes more mature, do we really need to keep them, give them that elevated access as it goes on? And then who has that admin access or root access? Should they? Sometimes you have a thing, once again, where they're doing everything in the background, but maybe we shouldn't give them everything. Abuse of privilege is another thing. You have a rogue admin, maybe they're a disgruntled employee, or maybe on their way out. Make sure that they're having the right information. Person who changed roles, who was grandfathered access to do something they should not. Along with that, whenever a person changes roles in the company, is their old access revoked? A lot of the times that was not the case in the past companies I worked with. They would just still have that access. So something, maybe an audit every once in a while to tell that. And then abandoned privileges, users that are still active when the application is no longer active. In a SQL server, it's very possible that they have access to multiple databases, but if a database goes offline, they'd still have access to maybe more underlying systems that we don't want them to have access to. And then users that have left the company, but their access is not revoked, are they still able to log in through some nefarious way or anything like that? So something to think about. At this point, it sounds like I'm creating a lot more work for you as a DBA. I can imagine you saying, my job is to keep the database online and processing as quickly as possible. Isn't security somebody else's job? The first job of a DBA is and always has been data protection. You're here to protect what I would call the crown jewels of the company, and that is data. The way this is accomplished is twofold: confirming backups are being completed and managing proper access to the data itself. With backups, you are ensuring that your company is protected in case of hardware failure or attack. When you're managing the proper access, you are ensuring that specific users or groups only have the access they need. Along with this brings us to data lifecycle. So knowing where your data lives, how many copies of the databases are out there? Backups count in this case. Do you know where all your backups are? Are they in a secured location? Who has access to that location? And then how many copies of tables are out there? Do you have an analyst taking copies from the database and putting in Excel files, things like that? Are there flat files all over the place in your environment? Are they actually secured? Who could get into that data? Along with that, storage media exposure, who has access to where the database files live? Who has access to where the backup files live? Who has access to delete the data, databases, and their backups? And who has physical access to the storage? Can they walk into your data center, take out a drive, and put it somewhere else and recover from there? And then data placement. Are you placing internally used data near externally used data? Can they commingle? At this point, I would say it is accurate to state that DBAs ultimately are responsible for maintaining the three pillars of security: confidentiality, integrity, and availability across the entire data lifecycle, basically. But what about the access points you have no control over, like applications that generate and manipulate data you are protecting? That's where we take up the role of the trusted advisor. With application usage, some of the things you can use are what's called data masking. Sensitive data should be protected by row-level security, but also with masking. Maybe taking those credit card information, fudging them into different types, things like that. When data is at rest, should credit card numbers, social security numbers be stored in clear text? Probably not. And that's something you have to talk with your application about, application users about. Try to get that, find that middle ground, as it were. Database injection, is your application using a service account that has elevated permissions? If it can do more than what it needs to do within the application, that's probably not great. So, is your application using procedures to access the database instead of direct queries to the database? It's probably better to use a stored proc, or sometimes other programs like ORMs and things like that only have specific access. So usage outage is not in place. Can help, but this can help in forensics. If you don't have this set up, how do you know who's accessing your data and what they're doing with it? And then work with your auditing teams, embrace them out the gate and take careful consideration of their findings. So we are talking about internal audit or advisory teams here. It's best to work with internal teams first to prevent the pain down the road when you're using an external audit happens. Using this proactive approach helps remedy the issues before the external auditors get involved. So one question here, who should determine what data should be masked and or protected? So like I was kind of alluding to, that's kind of a conversation between the DBA and maybe the application owner, and also possibly your security teams. If the application owner says, I don't want anything, masked or encrypted, things like that, maybe bring along your security advisor and say, hey, we're having kind of a difficult conversation. Can you be that third person for me and maybe give me more information as far as that goes? And that probably would help in those kind of conversations where it's kind of hard to understand the differences. So moving on to the next section, we're talking about insurance policy. Now we have an idea of what needs to be done to limit our attack surface area. We can move on to steps we can take to ensure our downtime is limited in the event of a successful attack. So how do we hedge our bets in this case? An insurance policy at its most basic form is designed to protect us against certain risks. Proactive mitigation is equivalent to an insurance inspector reviewing your property and telling you, hey, I need to fix these pipes. Hey, there's something wrong with the electrical. Maybe fix that part. The fact of the matter is someone inevitably will get hurt on your property, and your insurance property covers you when somebody falls down the stairs or something like happened on your property, basically. So what is the critical type of insurance every company should carry? Most would say it's a backup strategy, but I would challenge that and say it's more of a recovery strategy. A better man than me basically told me one time, it's good to have backups, but it's better to know that you can actually restore from those backups. So human errors are unavoidable, like we covered before. So humans are involved. You cannot trust that the above is all done. You must have insurance policy, backups, basically. So recovery strategy is not a backup strategy. What are you trying to recover from? Think about those kinds of questions. That will tell how your backups, how to set up your backup environment, basically. The business always wants zero data loss. When they say this, research options how to do that with the cost. Then show them the bill. Basically, at that point, the business users will be like, oh, I can't afford that. And you're going to have a conversation of like, what can we logically actually get to? If that bill is affordable and they're okay with that, then great. You can proceed with the solution and implement it. If they balk at that point, if they can't afford it, what's acceptable to them? How long do we want to actually extend this out? Start building your recovery rules at that point, your RPOs and your RTOs. What happens to be done to hit a 15-minute RPO, in that case? These are questions you need to get them down on some kind of contract between you and your business owners. You have your recovery strategy in place at that point, and now you need to test it. Does it meet the business requirements? Are you actually getting it done within the time that you've stated within that contract? One and done is not good enough. The test strategy needs to be developed. Things happen from the first time you did your test until now. Have you written a corrupted byte, to that new restore? Has the size of the database or application changed, preventing you from hitting your RPO from being met? If so, what adjustments should you be making, basically? Can you pull the backup from the storage where the backup lives? This includes both hot storage and cold storage. Like if you've got these backups in AWS or something like that, how long does it take you to pull back from AWS first before you can start your restore? For BMR, there are lots of details to be overlooked. Testing this process can help flush those out, give you best information at that point. Is a sample tabletop exercise enough here? Full-blown recovery testing is a pretty big deal, is what you're probably saying at this point. This is good for thinking items that have been missed when creating a plan, but testing gives full insight as to other parts of the plan. So keep that in mind. So at this point, we're going to talk about how Rubrik does it for data security. So Rubrik for databases, we're going to consolidate all your databases onto one platform. We'll give you time back with automated discovery and protection built into the platform itself. And then we're going to deliver near zero RTOs while keeping your DBAs in full control of their backups. And then we'll support secondary users with self-service clones, where they can make live mounts, things like that, to where they can do their own kind of process as they need to. We're also designed for recovery. We're enabled to do near zero RTOs without the need for added storage. We have flexible recovery options. And then we ensure backups are valid and recoverable. With the simplification and monetization of backup process through automation, I turn your attention to what's just as even more important, and that's recovery. Restoring databases can be a tedious task, finding those files that you need to recover, and then actually reassembling the fulls and incrementals and get them back to the actual copy that's useful. That's a lot of work, Depending on the use case and SLA, Rubrik provides the DBA with a variety of options to recover, like exported, instant recovery, recovery production, file-only restores, and a thing called live mount. More on live mount in the next time, but imagine being able to resume operations nearly instantly and make hundreds of copies without consuming more storage. So we've covered quite a bit of material thus far. We know about steps we should take to prevent an attack and the resources we need to ensure recovery from an attack. Now let's talk about what we should do during an attack. So let's hope that the Borg doesn't hack your systems, but just in case, the fact of the matter is breaches will happen. The key is minimizing the impact of a breach is how you respond to it. So what should companies and their staff do when they discover an attack? First of all, take a deep breath, stay calm, and think before jumping into your action items. So some of the affected assets, you're going to ask, what do I have that's good? Analysis of the data, what is good and what isn't. What's the blast radius of my attack? What's affected by the worst happening, basically? Based on affected data, what is your recovery steps? Can I just recover the entire VM? Maybe the individual files, maybe the database, maybe just a table, maybe individual records, things like that. Recovery plan, make sure you have run books. Those run books will tell you, when everything's going haywire, that's when mistakes happen. If you have a run book, you can just follow step by step. That'll make it a lot easier for you. And what are your recovery times? Have you recorded those in your testing? Things like that. And then recovery isolation, recover data to non-production areas. Can we do that to validate that the data is good before putting it in production? This will help with forensics after the fact as well. So recovery tools, do you have backups to recover from? Stop operational tasks against the data. Don't back up the data until you confirm that the data is in a good state. And don't delete data no matter what you do. Make sure that that data is ready to go first. Communication and documentation. Does everybody know the recovery options? Do you have CIO or CTO down to the help desk, understanding that we're going to do step 1, step 2, step 3? Those are things you have to all get together on the same page for. So this might sound very familiar to how an elite athlete trains, basically. Know what you need to do, work with your tools. Do you have practice again, basically, until it just becomes muscle memory. But what happens if there's something wrong with how you train? This is where a postmortem comes in. So this process helps us make your overall recovery strategy better in the future. So the main steps we're going to talk about is what happened, what proactive steps failed, what tools failed, what systems and procedures failed, and what worked well, what scales and automations did you have that were good to go, and what variants, from what happened and what your recovery plan was. You thought it was going to go this way, but maybe it went a little different way. Maybe we need to adjust our plan to make them a little bit better. What is the ROI on your plan versus what happened? Did your plan net the benefits you expected? And then what should be changed? Process, technology, or tools. The main thing I have to stress, though, is this postmortem is not a blame session. Blame session will do nothing to help you in this situation. You have to make sure that everybody is just there to get information. That's all you're trying to get. Excuse me. If you go around pointing fingers, you'll get less help the next time you come around. So, key takeaways here. We've covered a great deal of content in this section. Let's recap some of the key takeaways. Work with your organization's security team. And in order to prevent a breach, it isn't realistic to think you can stop every attack. It's just not going to happen. You need to ensure you protect your critical assets and have a mechanism to return them to service quickly. Excuse me. Panic under stress is your worst enemy. Have a plan. Having a plan isn't enough. You need to execute the plan regularly and revise it when you discover shortcomings. A comprehensive response plan ensures all participants know their role and what they need to do. Testing this plan in a controlled fashion enables everyone to understand what is expected of them. We spoke about some of the unique Rubrik features for database protection, but some of us as DBAs here are not salespeople. So here's an opportunity to review what Gartner has to say about Rubrik. Feel free to download a complimentary copy of the latest Gartner Magic Quadrant. Rubrik is proud to be ranked among the leaders again for the third year in a row. And this year, all the solutions, Rubik ranked furthest to the right for the completeness of vision again. So some resources if you're interested, a little bit more detail. We have virtual demos all the time on our Rubik website. I strongly recommend keeping an eye out for some of the virtual events we have, which can actually get hands-on with the product and see in action yourself. There's some additional materials on what to look for on modern data protection solutions for databases, as well as a link to a guide on how to recover from ransomware if you're interested. That's all I have to present today. Thank you very much for coming. Have a great day.
Thank you again, Chris, for such an insightful session. This concludes today's webinar, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this excellent virtual event. And thank you again to our partner, Rubrik. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.